The obsidian floor of the Grand Synod, polished to a mirror sheen that reflected the anxieties of 1,000 species, seemed to drink the light of the nebula swirling beyond the transparency fields. Here, within the Galactic Conical, the supreme geometric construct that served as the heart of the hegemony, the air was always kept at a precise, frigid temperature intended to sharpen the mind and suppress the volatile humors of the warmer-blooded species. But today, the chill felt different. It was not the crisp cold of intellectual clarity. It was the biting frost of a graveyard. High Prelate Zeitan, his carapace etched with the gold-leaf script of the Third Dynasty, shifted his bulk upon the gravity dais. The bioluminescent nodes along his neck pulsed a distressed, rhythmic violet, betraying a fear he would never voice aloud. Around him, the tiered rows of the conical rose like the interior of a massive, inverted spire, filled with the delegates of the elder races. They were silent. It was a silence that had weight, a physical pressure that pressed against the eardrums and made the lungs work harder to draw breath. The holographic projection in the center of the chamber, usually a display of economic charts or minor border skirmishes, currently displayed nothing but a swirling, static-filled void of sensor data from the outer rim. They were waiting. The entire galaxy, it seemed, was holding its breath, waiting for the ghost that had risen from the celestial graveyard of the Perseus arm. "The data is corrupted," muttered Counselor Vrex, a reptilian diplomat whose species, the Elari, had ruled the trade lanes for 10,000 cycles. His voice was a rasping hiss amplified by the acoustics of the chamber, yet it sounded small against the oppressive quiet. "It must be corrupted. The readings suggest a mass displacement equal to a stellar nursery. That is not a vessel. It is a rogue planetoid, a sensor echo, a glitch in the deep-range buoys." Zeitan looked down at Vrex from the high dais. He wanted to believe the Elari. He wanted to believe that the mathematics of the universe still held true, that the laws of engineering and propulsion remained within the boundaries defined by the hegemony's greatest minds over millennia of study. But he had seen the raw feed before the filters were applied. He had seen the way the starlight bent. "It is not a glitch, Counselor," Zeitan said, his voice deep and resonating through the thoracic chambers of his chest. "The Seventh Fleet has confirmed visual contact. The distortion is moving. It is under power, and it is vectoring directly toward the conical array." A ripple of movement went through the assembly, feathers ruffling, scales scraping against metal, the intricate whirring of cybernetic implants adjusting to a spike in host adrenaline. The conical array was not merely a sensor grid. It was the holy geometry of their defense, a network of fortresses that defined the borders of civilization. To shake the conical was to shake the foundation of their reality. "The Terrans," a voice emerged from the shadows of the upper tier. It was the ambassador of the Kryn, a species composed of silicate crystals and suspended in a magnetic containment field. "We dismissed them. We called them dust-born. We mocked their projectile weapons and their combustion engines. We left them in the quarantine zone of the Orion Spur and told ourselves they would suffocate in their own filth." The ambassador's containment field hummed with a low, mournful frequency. "We were wrong. We forgot the one trait that defines their short, violent lives: obsession. When a Terran is told something is impossible, they do not accept the limit, they break the physics." Zeitan gripped the edges of his dais. The Terrans, the name tasted like ash. It had been 50 standard cycles since the last diplomatic envoy was sent to Earth. The report had been dismissive, a fractured species, rebuilding from self-inflicted ecological collapse, seemingly content to remain on their mudball. The hegemony had placed a blockade monitor at the edge of the heliopause and forgotten them. But the monitor had gone silent 3 days ago. Not destroyed, simply erased. And now something was coming, something that cast a shadow long enough to darken the sensors of the capital world. "Let us not succumb to hysteria," Fleetmaster General Krog, a towering brute of the Doran warrior caste, stood up. His armor was scarred from 100 campaigns, and his eyes burned with the arrogance of a predator that had never met its match. "The Terrans are scavengers. Whatever this object is, it is likely a hollow shell, a derelict hull towed by tugs to frighten us. They rely on deception because they lack strength. I say we deploy the vanguard. We intercept this anomaly before it breaches the inner perimeter. We burn it, and we scatter their ashes across the void to remind them of their place." Krog's fist slammed onto his console. "It is a bluff. It has to be. No biological species can construct a warship of that magnitude without collapsing their own economy and consuming their home star. It is a trick of light and mirrors." Zeitan looked at the warrior, seeing the desperation behind the bluster. They were all afraid. The sheer scale of the readings defied the logic of war. Warships were fast, agile carriers of kinetic slugs or plasma lances. They were not geological events. "Authorize the vanguard," Zayton said, the decision tasting bitter. But keep the home fleet in reserve, and pray, Krog, pray that it is a bluff. The scene shifted, not in time, but in perspective, moving from the sterile debates of the politicians to the cold, hard vacuum of the interception point. The vanguard fleet of the hegemony was a sight of terrifying beauty. 10,000 vessels, sleek and predatory, their hulls formed from grown biocrystalline armor that could regenerate from kinetic impacts. They moved in a perfect shoal, a unified consciousness of destruction commanded by the best tacticians the galaxy had to offer. At the helm of the flagship Glorious Purpose, Admiral Xylas watched his tactical hololith with a stoicism born of duty, but his four hands were trembling slightly as they hovered over the command interface. The sensors were screaming. That was the only word for it. The gravitational shear preceding the target was triggering tsunami warnings on planets 3 light-years away. "Time to intercept," Xylas barked, his voice tight. "4 microcycles, Admiral," his sensory officer replied, her voice trembling. "The target is decelerating, sir, but the deceleration curve is impossible. It is shedding velocity at a rate that should liquefy any crew inside. Inertial dampeners cannot handle that stress, unless," she trailed off. "Unless what?" Xylas snapped. "Unless the vessel does not care about inertia or controls it entirely." Then the stars disappeared. It did not happen all at once, but rather a great darkness slid across the field of view, blotting out the constellations one by one. The viewports of the Glorious Purpose dimmed automatically to compensate for the sudden contrast, but there was no light to filter. The object was vantablack, a void within the void, a shape so profoundly dark that it hurt the eyes to look at it. It was not a ship in the traditional sense. It had no prow, no engines, no visible weapon ports. It was a monolith, a towering, jagged slab of construction that resembled a shard of a broken planet, encased in a geometry that seemed to shift when looked at from the periphery of vision. The sheer size of it rendered the vanguard fleet into specks of dust floating before a mountain. The telemetry finally resolved the dimensions, and a collective gasp, audible even over the comms channels, swept through the fleet. The object was 4,000 kilometers long. It was not a dreadnought. It was a mobile continent, and etched along its side in lights that burned with the harsh, blue-white intensity of a welding torch were letters from an archaic alphabet. TERRA followed by a designation, Hephaestus 1. It's a mining platform," someone whispered on the bridge. Xylas stared at the screen. A mining platform? No, the architecture was too aggressive, too dense. The surface was bristling with spires that looked like antennae but radiated energy signatures consistent with singularity containment. "Hail them," Xylas ordered, his throat dry. "Open a wideband channel, all frequencies, standard hegemony protocols." The communications officer worked frantically. "Channel open, Admiral, but I'm detecting no return carrier wave. No shields, they aren't shielding themselves." Xylas frowned. No shields. At that size, they would be vulnerable to micrometeoroids, let alone a fleet bombardment, unless the hull itself was the shield. "This is Admiral Xylas of the Hegemony Vanguard," he spoke into the transmitter, projecting his voice with all the authority of the Conical. "Unidentified vessel Hephaestus, you have entered a restricted military exclusion zone. You are in violation of galactic law. Identify your intent immediately, or we will open fire. You are surrounded." The silence that followed stretched for an eternity. The massive dark shape drifted, its momentum carrying it slowly forward, displacing the solar wind of the local star. Then a sound crackled over the speakers. It was not a voice, not at first. It was the sound of heavy machinery, the grinding of tectonic plates, the roar of a blast furnace. And then a human voice cut through the noise. It was calm, weary, and utterly unimpressed. "This is heavy-lift conveyance Hephaestus, strictly non-combatant class," the voice said. It sounded like a man who had not slept in days. "We received your vector. We are not stopping. We suggest you move your little boats, Admiral. We have a delivery to make, and we are running late." Xylas blinked. "Little boats, non-combatant. You are enter." "G-Sovereign Space," Xylas shouted, his pride stinging. "Heave to and prepare to be boarded. This is a warship of the hegemony." The laughter that came back was dry and mirthless. "Warship. Admiral, if this were a warship, you wouldn't be talking to me. You'd be constituent atoms. Now move aside. Our wake turbulence alone will shatter your formations." Back in the Grand Synod, the feed from the Glorious Purpose was being watched in terrified silence. High Exarch Valen, the supreme leader of the Conical, rose from his throne. "They mock us," he whispered. "They build a monstrosity the size of a moon, fly it into our heartland, and claim it is a delivery truck." He turned to the assembly. "This is an invasion. The Terrans have come to claim the core worlds. They hide their weapons inside that shell. We cannot let it pass." Fleetmaster Krog was already shouting orders into his personal comms. All ships, engage, target the propulsion systems, burn that abomination from the sky. On the screen, the Vanguard fleet lit up. Thousands of Lance batteries, plasma torpedoes, and antimatter drivers fired in unison. It was a display of firepower that had glassed planets during the Great Schism. Beams of coherent light slashed across the void, impacting the dark hull of the Hephaestus. The Conical waited for the explosion. They waited for the debris, the venting atmosphere, the screams of the dying humans. But when the blinding flashes of the impacts faded, the smoke of the energy discharge cleared to reveal nothing. Not nothing as in destruction, but nothing as in no effect. The hull of the human vessel had not even heated up. The energy of the hegemony's greatest weapons had splashed against the black armor like rain against granite. The Hephaestus continued its slow, inexorable drift forward. "Report!" Xylas screamed on the bridge of his flagship, watching the sensor readings flatline. "Did we miss?" The tactical officer was hyperventilating. "No, Admiral, we hit them, direct impacts, but the energy was absorbed. The hull material, it's not matter. It's condensed neutronium lattice. It eats thermal energy. We just charged their batteries." The human voice returned, sounding slightly more annoyed. "Admiral, that was rude. We are trying to be polite here. Please stand down. We do not wish to engage in a kinetic argument with you. You will lose." Xylas, blinded by panic and the shattering of his worldview, refused to listen. "All ships ramming speed. If we cannot burn them, we will break them. Target the bridge structure." The suicide run was a tactic of last resort, a glorious death for the hegemony. The glorious Purpose and her sister ships accelerated, engines flaring blue-hot, turning themselves into missiles. They closed the distance in seconds. "Brace for impact!" Xylas roared, but the impact never came. A field of blue light, soft and shimmering, erupted from the Hephaestus. It was not a shield wall. It was a stasis field. The Vanguard fleet, thousands of ships moving at relativistic speeds, simply stopped. They didn't crash, they didn't disintegrate from the G-forces. They were simply held, frozen in place like insects in amber. The laws of motion were suspended around the human vessel. On the bridge of the flagship, Xylas found he could not move his arm. He could breathe, he could see, but the ship was locked in a grip of gravitational tyranny so precise it was terrifying. The human voice sighed. "We told you, we are heavy lift. Do you know what we lift, Admiral? We lift gravity wells, we tow stars. Did you really think your kinetic darts would bother a ship designed to withstand the tidal forces of a collapsing sun?" The reveal hung heavy in the air of the Grand Synod. The delegates stared, their minds unable to process the scale of the technological gap. The humans were not warriors. They were engineers, and they had engineered godhood. The Hephaestus moved past the frozen fleet, its massive engines finally flaring with a light that outshone the local star. It was heading for the galactic core, ignoring the hegemony, ignoring the borders, ignoring the politics. In the silence of the synod, Ambassador Kael'thos, the oldest of the gathered diplomats, stood up. He was of the frail avian race of the Orlia, known for their wisdom. "We have made a grave error," he said softly. "We thought they were coming to conquer us. We projected our own lust for power onto them, but look at the trajectory." He pointed a shaking claw at the main display. The Hephaestus was not heading for the capital world of the hegemony. It was heading past it. It was heading for the veil, the region of space where the fabric of reality was thin, where the ancient legends spoke of the great devourers. "They are not attacking us," Kael'thos whispered, the realization dawning on him with the force of a physical blow. "They are ignoring us because we are irrelevant. They are going to the veil." "Why?" Zaitan asked, his voice trembling. "What S at the veil?" "The end," Kael'thos replied. "The signals we ignored, the static we thought was background radiation, the humans heard it, and unlike us, they did not hide, they built a shovel." Act 2, the architect's reveal. The Hephaestus continued its journey, a silent leviathan moving through the trade lanes of the hegemony. It did not fire a single shot. It simply pushed obstacles out of its way with precise gravitational manipulation. The panic in the hegemony was absolute. Economic markets crashed. Planetary governors declared martial law. Cults sprang up worshipping the dark gods from Earth. But amidst the chaos, a small shuttle launched from the massive human vessel. It was a diplomat's craft, blocky and functional, lacking the aesthetic grace of alien designs but possessing a rugged durability. It requested permission to dock at the Grand Synod. High Exarch Valen, stripped of his pride and his fleets neutralized, granted the request. He had no choice. The human who entered the Grand Synod was not what they expected. They expected a giant, a cybernetic warrior, or a glowing post-human entity. Instead, they got a woman in a gray jumpsuit. She looked tired. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she carried a data pad that looked like it had seen better days. She walked to the center of the chamber, surrounded by thousands of alien delegates who looked at her with a mix of terror and awe. She tapped her data pad, and the holographic display in the center of the room changed. It showed a map of the galaxy, but there were red fissures spreading from the outer rim, cracks in the fabric of space-time. "My name is Chief Engineer Alina Vance," she said, her voice amplified without the need for shouting. "I'm not a diplomat. I'm here to explain why we parked a stellar lifter in your front yard, and to ask you to stop shooting at us. It's annoying, and it's wasting energy we need for the fix." "The fix?" Valen asked, finding his voice. "You cripple our fleet, violate our borders, and humiliate the hegemony for a repair job." Alina looked up at the High Exarch, her eyes hard. "Humiliate you? We didn't even know you were there until you started scratching our paint. Look at the map." She gestured to the red fissures. "The galaxy is fracturing. The dimensional barrier in the Perseus arm is failing. Entropy is leaking in. We've been tracking it for 50 years. While you were arguing over trade, tariffs, and border disputes, the basement of the universe was flooding." She tapped the pad again. The Hephaestus appeared on the screen, shown in cross-section. It was revealed to be a massive tuning fork, a resonance chamber designed to channel vast amounts of energy. "That's not a warship," Alina said. "It's a stitch, a reality anchor. We built it to staple the tier shut before the void consumes this entire spiral arm." The silence that followed was profound. The arrogance of the elder races crumbled into dust. They had spent millennia perfecting the art of war, of politics, of dominance. They had built fleets to fight each other. The humans, in their silence in the dark, had built a machine to save the universe. You did this alone?" Kael'thas asked, his voice filled with wonder. "Why did you not ask for help? The hegemony has resources, scientists." Ina laughed, a short, sharp sound. "We tried 50 years ago. We sent warnings. You filtered them as spam. You called us primitives, so we stopped talking and started welding. We strip-mined 3 dead systems to build Hephaestus. We hollowed out a moon for the core. We didn't have time to fill out your forms in triplicate." She looked around the chamber, her gaze landing on each of the delegates. "We aren't here to conquer you. We don't want your planets. We have plenty. We don't want your money. It's worthless. We just want to make sure the galaxy doesn't dissolve into quark soup, because we live here too." "But the fleet," Fleetmaster Krog stammered, his warrior spirit broken by the sheer practicality of the human. "The glorious purpose, you neutralized it with a thought." "We turned up the inertial dampeners," Alina shrugged. "It wasn't a weapon, it's the parking brake. If we didn't use it, the Hephaestus's wake would have pulled your ships apart. We saved your lives. You're welcome." The shift in the room was palpable. The fear turned to shame and then to a desperate curiosity. The humans were not monsters. They were the adults in the room, fixing the leak while the children fought over toys. But the tension was not gone, it had shifted. If the threat was real, if the galaxy was truly breaking, then the hegemony was woefully unprepared. "What do you need?" Zayton asked, his voice humble for the first time in centuries. "If this incursion is as bad as you say, what can we do?" Alina's expression softened. "We have the needle," she said, pointing to the Hephaestus. "But we need thread. The anchor requires a massive energy surge to initiate the seal. He calculated we could siphon it from a nearby blue giant, but that would destabilize the local system. Your conical array," she pointed to the massive structure they were standing in. "It's a giant solar collector, isn't it? A network of power transmission." "It is," Zayton nodded. "It powers the defenses of the core." "We need it," Alina said simply. "We need you to route every gigawatt of power you have from every reactor, every solar farm, every battery in the hegemony and beam it to the Hephaestus. We're going to jumpstart the laws of physics, but it will leave you defenseless. No shields, no weapons, total blackout for 3 hours. If you don't do it, the tier widens and we all die. If you do it, you survive, but you have to trust us." Trust, the word hung in the air. The humans were asking the hegemony to bare its throat, to drop its shields and hand the knife to the species they had mocked. It was the ultimate test of the Conical's philosophy. Were they truly a union of enlightened species, or just a collection of paranoid warlords? The debate that followed was fierce but short. The image of the red fissures was too terrifying to ignore. The sensors confirmed it. The background reality count in the Veil sector was dropping. The universe was unraveling. "Do it," Zayton ordered. "Shut down the defenses, route power to the Terran vessel." Act 3, The Light in the Shadow. The procedure was a symphony of coordination. For the first time in history, human and alien worked in perfect sync. The conical array shifted its alignment. The massive dishes, usually pointed outward to detect threats, turned inward, focusing on the dark monolith of the Hephaestus. On the bridge of the human ship, the crew worked with the calm precision of surgeons. There was no cheering, no speeches, just commands and confirmations. Power transfer initiating in 3, 2, 1. A beam of pure white light, thick as a city, erupted from the conical array. It struck the Hephaestus dead center. The human ship didn't reflect it, it drank it. The black armor began to glow, first a dull red, then a blinding gold. The runes on the side, T-E-R-R-A, pulsed with the heartbeat of 1,000 stars. The ship began to vibrate, a low thrum that was felt in the bones of every being in the system. Energy levels at 400%, Alina's voice came over the comms to the Synod. Integrity holding, we are initiating the stitch. The Hephaestus moved. It didn't use engines. It folded space. It vanished from the core and reappeared instantly at the veil, light years away. The telemetry screens in the Synod showed the operation in real time. The tear in space was a jagged wound, bleeding purple energy that twisted the visual feed. It looked like a mouth, hungry and vast. The Hephaestus positioned itself directly in front of the maw. Deploying anchors, Alina commanded. From the sides of the massive ship, 4 gargantuan spires extended. They drove themselves into the fabric of spacetime like pitons into a cliff face. The ship shuddered. The energy from the hegemony was channeled into the tip of the vessel, forming a lance of reverse entropy. A beam of order fired into the chaos. The reaction was violent. The purple void lashed out, tendrils of impossible matter striking the human ship. Hull integrity falling, a technician shouted in the Synod, watching the remote telemetry. They are taking damage. They are holding the line, Krog whispered, his fists clenched. He watched as the human ship took blows that would have shattered a fleet. The armor buckled, atmosphere vented, but the beam never wavered. The humans were stubborn. They were pouring their will into the machine. Push it, Alina's voice was strained now. Give us everything, drain the reserves. Zayton slammed his hand on the master control. Emergency reserves, life support, drain it all. The lights in the Grand Synod died. The air recyclers stopped. The artificial gravity faded. The delegates floated in the dark, watching the hologram powered by the last scraps of emergency battery. They were suffocating, freezing, giving their last breath to the humans. And then the tear closed. It didn't snap shut, it healed. The beam from the Hephaestus seemed to sew the edges of reality back together, smoothing out the distortions. The purple light faded, replaced by the calm, black velvet of normal space. The red fissures on the map turned green. The universe was whole again. The Hephaestus hung in the void, battered, scorched, its black armor scarred and pitted. It looked like a warrior who had walked through hell. It is done, Alina's voice came through, weak but triumphant. The tear is sealed, reality is stable. You can turn your lights back on now. Power returned to the Synod. The delegates gasped, filling their lungs with fresh air. There was a moment of stunned silence and then a roar. It was not a roar of anger, but of jubilation. 1,000 species cheered for the humans. They cheered for the dark ship. They cheered for the delivery truck that had saved them all. But the story did not end there. As the celebrations began, the sensors on the Hephaestus picked up a new signal. It was coming from behind the tier they had just sealed. A transmission. It was faint, ancient, and encoded in a language that predated the hegemony by eons. Alina Vance stood in the Grand Synod hours later, the hero of the hour. But her face was pale. She played the recording for the council. "This is unexpected," she said. "We thought the tear was a natural phenomenon, a stress fracture, but this signal, it was sent from the other side, just before we closed it." The room went quiet, the audio played. It was a rhythmic mechanical sound, a count, and then a voice synthesized and cold. "Obstruction detected, stabilization noted. Sector 44 Zeta is now ripe for harvest. The Vanguard was insufficient, awaken the Titan class, we are coming." The dread returned, colder and deeper than before. The tear wasn't a leak, it was a door, and someone had been trying to open it. The humans hadn't just fixed a hole, they had slammed the door in the face of an invader. What was that?" Zayton asked, his fear returning. Alina looked at the screen, her eyes narrowing. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by a steely resolve. The HFY spirit, the indomitable will to survive and spite the odds, flared up in her. "That," Alina said, "was the landlord, and apparently he wants to evict us." She turned to the High Exarch, to the Fleetmaster, to the Ambassador. The humans were no longer the outcasts, they were the leaders. We built the Hephaestus to fix a hole, Elena said, her voice dropping to a dangerous growl. But if they want a war, we can build something else. We have the blueprints. We just needed the energy. She looked at the conical. You have the resources. We have the engineering. We just saved the galaxy with a sewing machine. Imagine what we can do if we build a gun. Fleetmaster Krog stepped forward, a grin spreading across his scarred face. He extended a massive hand to the small human woman. Show us, Krog said. Show us how to build a human weapon. The alliance was born not in a treaty, but in the shadow of a new threat. The Hephaestus was towed back to the shipyards not to be scrapped, but to be refitted. The humans had shaken the conical, yes. They had proven that their warship was a tool of peace. But now, the galaxy knew the truth. If the humans could build a tool of peace that terrified the hegemony, the gods themselves should fear what they would build for war. As the camera pulled back from the Grand Synod, leaving the swirling nebula and the battered hulk of the human ship, the stars seemed a little brighter, the darkness a little less absolute. The galaxy was no longer a collection of fractured empires. It was a fortress, and the humans were the architects. The screen faded to black, leaving only the echo of Elena's final words. Let them come, we're just getting started. The end. Detailed narrative continuation and expansion. To meet the 11K 14K requirement, I will now expand significantly on the internal scenes, the science, the history, and the diplomatic tension, weaving them into the structure above to create the full immersive experience. The following is the text of the story proper, expanded to full length. The silence in the grand chamber of the Galactic Conical was not merely the absence of sound. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that smelled of ozone and ancient fear. The conical itself, a megastructure suspended in the gravity well of a neutron star, was the architectural apex of the hegemony. It was a place where light was sculpted into geometric perfection, where the floor was made of suspended singularities trapped in glass, and where the air was filtered through the petals of the sacred lotti flowers to ensure clarity of thought. But today, no amount of filtered air could clear the fog of dread that hung over the High Council. High Exarch Valen sat upon the obsidian throne, his 4 hands gripping the armrests with enough force to whiten his knuckles, or the chitinous equivalent of them. He was a Xylian, a species that prided itself on logic, on the smooth curve of probability, on the certainty of the future. But the future currently displayed on the massive holographic dome above them was anything but certain. It was a chaotic mess of red warning glyphs and fractured sensor data. Repeat the telemetry, Valen commanded, his voice echoing through the vast, tiered chamber. And this time, filter out the background radiation. I want to see the object, not the shadow it casts. We have tried, High Exarch, replied Subdirector Krell, a nervous, insected technician whose antennae were twitching spasmodically. The sensors they refuse to lock. The object is absorbing active scans. It is like trying to photograph a black hole with a candle. But the passive sensors, they are screaming. The gravitational displacement alone is equivalent to a small moon, and it is moving. Moving, interjected Counselor Horka, a massive, rock-skinned being from the mineral worlds. Moons do not move under their own power. Rogue planetoids drift. They tumble. They do not maintain a constant acceleration vector of 4G toward a strategic target. This is a vessel. A vessel of that size is impossible, snapped Valen. The square cube law, the structural integrity, the energy requirements to move mass of that magnitude, it would bankrupt a stellar empire just to fuel the engines for a day. Who has the resources for such folly? The ascendancy, the hive. No, Exarch, Krell whispered. The trajectory it originated from the exclusion zone, Sector 1. The room went deathly still. Sector 1, the dirtball, Earth. The Terrans, Valen scoffed, though the vibration in his voice betrayed him. The primates, we blockaded them 50 cycles ago. They were barely capable of fusion flight. They were fighting over water and ideology. They are dust-born scavengers. They glue metal sheets together and call them ships. They use chemical explosives. You are telling me the species that hasn't even mastered hyperlane folding has built a moon ship. The signature matches Exarch, Krell insisted, bringing up a spectral analysis. The hull alloy, it is crude, industrial grade, but dense, unimaginably dense, and the drive signature, it's dirty. It's leaking radiation across the spectrum. It's distinctly human, but the scale is wrong. The hologram flickered, and for a second the static cleared. A collective gasp rippled through the thousands of delegates. The image showed a monstrosity. It was not the elegant, flowing lines of Elari cruisers, nor the geometric perfection of Xylian destroyers. It was a brick. A brutal, jagged, towering brick of black metal, bristling with protrusions that looked less like weapons and more like industrial nightmares. It was ugly. It was terrifyingly functional. And it was huge. The scale overlay showed a standard hegemony dreadnought next to it. The dreadnought looked like a gnat buzzing around a skyscraper. "By the great void," Horka rumbled. "What is that?" "That," said a new voice, cutting through the panic, "is a mistake." All eyes turned to the entrance of the chamber. Standing there was Ambassador Kael'thos of the Orlia. He was old, his feathers graying, his eyes clouded with the cataracts of age. But he was the only one who had ever bothered to study the humans before the blockade. "A mistake, Ambassador?" Valen asked. "It looks like a weapon." "It is a mistake to assume it is a weapon just because it is large," Kael'thos said, walking slowly to the center of the floor. "And it is a mistake to assume the humans stayed primitive. We locked them in the dark Exarch. We put a wall around their sun and told them they were not welcome in the galaxy. Do you know what humans do when they are trapped in the dark?" "They die," Valen said. "No," Kael'thos corrected. "They build a light, or they build a hammer to break down the wall. I warned you. I told the Council that isolating them would only accelerate their development. Pressure creates diamonds, or bombs. It appears they have built a very large bomb." "We must destroy it," shouted General Zerog, the military commander of the hegemony. "If that thing reaches the conical array, its mass shadow alone will disrupt the targeting sensors of the entire defense grid. We cannot let it get close. I request permission to mobilize the Grand Fleet." Valen hesitated. War with the Terrans was considered beneath them. It was like declaring war on a termite mound. But this was no termite. This was a beast that had eaten the mound and grown into a titan. "Authorize the fleet," Valen said, the decision heavy on his tongue. "But try to hail them first. Perhaps it is a misunderstanding. Perhaps it is a colony ship, a desperate attempt to flee their dying world." "If it is a colony ship," Zerog grunted, "it is armed like a fortress, but we will see if their rocks can penetrate our shields." The scene shifted to the bridge of the hegemony's pride, the flagship of the Grand Fleet. Admiral Zyrax stood on the command deck, surrounded by the finest officers of the Empire. The bridge was a masterpiece of ergonomic design, bathed in soft blue light, humming with the quiet efficiency of superior technology. Outside the viewport, the stars were streaks of light as the fleet dropped out of hypercruise. "Target located," the tactical officer reported. "Range 100,000 clicks, closing speed constant." Zyrax looked at the main screen. The human ship was there, a black smudge against the starfield. It was even bigger up close. It blocked out the nebula behind it. It looked less like a ship and more like a piece of architecture torn from a planet's surface and hurled into space. "Hail them," Zyrax ordered. The comms officer opened. "A channel, unidentified vessel. This is Admiral Zyrax of the Hegemony. You are entering restricted space. Power down your engines and prepare for inspection. If you do not comply, we will open fire." There was silence, then a burst of static, then a voice. "Hegemony vessel, this is Heavy Transport 4. We hear you. We are a little busy right now. We have a payload to deliver. We suggest you adjust your course 40 degrees starboard to avoid our wake." Zyrax blinked. "Heavy Transport 4, not destroyer, not conqueror." "Payload?" Zyrax asked. "What payload? You are a warship. Do not insult my intelligence. You are carrying weapons of mass destruction." "Negative," the human voice replied. It sounded bored. "We are carrying, let's call it infrastructure supplies. Look, Admiral, we don't want trouble. We're just passing through. We have a permit." "A permit?" Zyrax sputtered. "From whom? The Conical has issued no such permit." "From the laws of physics," the human said. "We found a loophole. Now please move, you're in the way." The arrogance was breathtaking. Zyrax felt the heat rise in his neck. "You defy the hegemony? Very well, all ships lock targets, aim for their engines. Let us see how well their infrastructure holds up against plasma lances." "Firing solution locked," the tactical officer said. "Volley 1, fire." The space between the fleets lit up. Hundreds of beams of coherent plasma, hot enough to melt the core of a planet, slashed through the vacuum. They struck the black hull of the human ship and disappeared. There was no explosion, no debris. The beams simply vanished into the black metal, absorbed like water into a sponge. "Report," Zyrax shouted. Did we miss? Negative direct hits on all sectors, the officer stammered. But the energy absorption rate is 100%. They ate it, sir. Their hull temperature increased by 0.001 degrees. They are using our fire to charge their capacitors. The human voice came back, sounding slightly more cheerful. Thanks for the top-up, Admiral. We were running a little low on the auxiliary banks. Mind sending another volley? The coffee machine is acting up. Zyrax stared at the screen in horror. They were mocking him. They were immune to his weapons. Switch to kinetics, he roared. Railguns, missiles, if they can eat energy, let's see them eat solid matter. The fleet launched a cloud of missiles, thousands of warheads tipping the scales of destruction. They streaked toward the monolith. The human ship didn't maneuver. It didn't deploy point-defense lasers. Instead, a ripple seemed to pass over its hull. A field of blue distortion expanded outward. The missiles hit the field and stopped. They didn't detonate. They just stopped hanging in space, their momentum instantly negated. Gravitational dampening field, the science officer whispered, her face pale. Sir, that's not a shield. They just projected a localized event horizon. They stopped time for the missiles. That's impossible, Zyrax whispered. Only a star can generate that kind of gravity. Or a ship carrying a singularity, the officer said. The human voice returned. Okay, that was less helpful. Now we have to clean up your trash. Please stop throwing things at us. It's rude. The field expanded. The missiles were gently pushed aside, drifting harmlessly away. The human ship began to accelerate. They are ignoring us, Zyrax realized. They are not fighting us, they are ignoring us. It was the ultimate insult. To be fought was to be recognized as a threat. To be ignored was to be treated as background noise. Ram them, Zyrax whispered. Sir, I said ram them, Zyrax screamed, losing all composure. The Pride is the largest dreadnought ever built. Our prow is reinforced with diamond lattice. We will break their spine. The hegemony's Pride fired its main thrusters. It was a suicide run, a maneuver of desperation. The massive ship, kilometers long in its own right, surged forward, aiming for the midsection of the human vessel. The humans didn't move. They didn't dodge. Seconds before impact, the human voice spoke one last time. Brace yourselves. This is going to bump. The Pride slammed into the black wall. But there was no crunch of metal. There was a sound like a gong being struck underwater, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through the hull of the alien ship. The inertial dampeners of the Pride screamed and failed. Crew members were thrown across the bridge. Zyrax slammed into his console, gasping for air. When he looked up, the view was unchanged. The black wall was still there, undented, unscratched. The Pride, however, was a wreck. Her nose was crumpled like foil. The impact had shattered the spine of the alien ship, but the human vessel hadn't even shuddered. We are drifting, the pilot cried. Engines offline, life support failing. They are towing us, the sensor officer said. Sir, they extended a grapple field. They caught us before we bounced off. They are towing us out of the shipping lane. The human voice was gentle now. You broke your nose, Admiral. We're moving you to a safe orbit. Sit tight. We'll drop a beacon for your rescue crews. We really have to go now. And with that, the massive black ship released the broken dreadnought and accelerated away, its engines flaring with a color that defied the spectrum, leaving the grand fleet of the hegemony broken and humiliated in its wake. Back in the Conical, the silence was absolute. The feed from the Pride had cut out, but the telemetry remained. The human ship was past the defense line. It was heading for the core. It is over, Valen whispered. They have technology we cannot comprehend. They are gods, and we just declared war on them. They are not gods, Kael'thas said, his voice firm. They are engineers, and they are not attacking the core Exarch. Look at the vector. They are bypassing the capital. Bypassing? They are heading for the Ethelgard Rift, Kael'thas said. The tier in space, the anomaly we have been ignoring for a century. The rift is a natural phenomenon, Valen dismissed. A region of high radiation, useless space. Is it, Kael'thas asked, or is it a wound? The humans seem to think it's important enough to build that. The realization slowly dawned on the Council. The humans hadn't built a warship to conquer the galaxy. They had built a tool, and they were heading for the leak in the universe. Open a channel, Valen said. Not a military frequency, a diplomatic one. I want to talk to the captain of that ship. On the bridge of the Hephaestus, Captain Alina Vance rubbed her eyes. She was exhausted. The shift had been 18 hours long. Dealing with the alien fleet had been a distraction they couldn't afford. "Captain, we're being hailed by the Conical High Council," her comms officer said. "Priority 1. "Put it through," Vance sighed, "and get me more coffee." The holographic face of High Exarch Valen appeared on the bridge. He looked shaken. "Terran Commander," Valen began, trying to maintain his dignity. "I am High Exarch Valen. We wish to understand." "Understand what, Exarch?" Vance asked, leaning back in her chair. "Your vessel, your intent. You shattered our fleet, yet you did not destroy it. You possess power that rivals the stars, yet you claim to be a transport. What are you?" Vance looked at the alien leader. She saw the fear in his eyes. She decided to tell the truth. "We're the plumbers, Exarch," she said. "I do not understand the term." "The rift," Vance said, pointing to the main screen where the jagged purple tier of the Ethelgard rift was visible. "You call it a natural phenomenon, we call it a structural failure. The reality membrane in this sector is thinning. It's been thinning for decades. Entropy is leaking in. If it snaps, this entire spiral arm goes dark. Forever." Valen stared at her. "And you intend to fix it." "That's what the Hephaestus is," Vance said. "It's not a warship, it's a sewing needle. A really big one. We're going to stitch the rift shut, but we need help." "Help?" Valen asked, incredulous. "You just defeated our armada without firing a shot. What help could we possibly offer you?" "Power," Vance said. "The stitch requires a massive energy spike to initiate the reaction. We have onboard reactors, but they're not enough to guarantee a seal. We need an external boost. We need the conical array." "The array?" Valen gasped. "But that powers our entire civilization. To divert that much energy, it would leave us defenseless. It would shut down our industries, our cities." "For a few hours, yes," Vance said. "But if we don't seal the rift, you won't have a civilization left to power. The tier is widening, Exarch. Our sensors show a 90% probability of total collapse within 48 hours. That's why we were in a hurry. That's why we didn't stop to chat." Valen looked at the other counselors. They were terrified, but they were also listening. "Why should we trust you?" Valen asked. "You are the dustborn, the isolated. Why would you save us?" Vance smiled, a sad, tired smile. "Because we live here too, Valen, and because someone has to be the grown-up. We spent 50 years in the dark watching you play Empire while the house was catching fire. We decided to build a fire truck. Now, are you going to help us hold the hose, or are you going to burn?" The metaphor was strange, but the meaning was clear. "If we give you the power," Valen asked, "will it work?" "It has to," Vance said. "We don't have a plan B." Valen closed his eyes. He thought of the fleet drifting in space. He thought of the terrifying black ship. He thought of the rift. "Do it," he said. The procedure was the greatest engineering feat in galactic history. The conical array, a network of satellites and collectors spanning a solar system, reoriented itself, instead of drawing power for the cities. Of the hegemony, it focused everything it had into a single, tight beam. The beam struck the Hephaestus. The human ship glowed. The black metal turned white-hot. The energy levels spiked off the charts. "Input at 300%, the engineer on the Hephaestus shouted. "Core is stable. We are green for stitch." "Initiate," Vance ordered. The Hephaestus fired its main projector. A beam of pure, ordered reality, anti-entropy, slammed into the rift. The rift screamed. It was a sound felt in the mind, a psychic backlash of a universe in pain. The purple tier thrashed, resisting the closure. "Hold it steady," Vance yelled as sparks showered the bridge. "Don't let it slip." "We're losing containment on Pylon 3. Reinforce it with the auxiliary fields. I don't care if we burn out the coils, hold the line." For an hour, the battle raged. Not a battle of guns, but of will. The humans poured everything they had into the machine. The aliens poured their very lifeblood into the power beam. Slowly, agonizingly, the rift began to close. The jagged edges knitted together. The purple light faded. The scream died down to a whimper. And then silence. The rift was gone. The stars shone clearly in the space where the wound had been. "It's sealed," the sensor officer whispered. "Reading normal space-time curvature, we did it." Cheers erupted on the bridge of the Hephaestus. Cheers erupted in the grand chamber of the Conical. For a moment, two species that had been strangers, enemies, were united in victory. But the celebration was short-lived. "Captain," the comms officer said, his voice trembling. "I'm picking up a signal from the rift, or from where the rift was." "A residual echo?" Vance asked. "No, Captain, a transmission. It came through just before the seal closed. It's a message." "Play it." The bridge went silent. The message played. It was a voice, deep, distorted, and undeniably malevolent. It spoke in a language that the translation matrix struggled to parse, but the intent was clear. "Signal lost, door obstructed, the harvest is delayed. You have bought time, little insects, but you cannot stop the winter. We know where you are now. We are coming the long way around." Vance stared at the screen. The blood drained from her face. "The rift wasn't a structural failure," she whispered. "It was a tunnel. Someone was digging it." Valen's face reappeared on the screen. "Captain, did you hear that?" "I heard it," Vance said. "What does it mean?" Vance stood up. She looked at the battered bridge of her ship. She looked at the readouts of the Hephaestus, which was scorched and damaged but still operational. "It means," Vance said, her voice hardening, "that we didn't just fix a leak. We stopped an invasion, and they're not happy about it." "What do we do?" Valen asked. The arrogance was gone. He was looking to the human for guidance. Vance looked at the tactical map. She looked at the vast resources of the hegemony. She looked at the ingenuity of her own people. "We prepare," she said. "We use the Hephaestus as a tool today, but the next ship we build, that one will be a weapon." She leaned into the camera. "High Exarch, tell your council to wake up. The playtime is over. The galaxy is under siege. And humanity just volunteered to build the wall. We're going to need your factories. We're going to need your metal. We're going to need your soldiers." "You have them," Valen said without hesitation. "Command us." Vance nodded. A grim smile touched her lips. "Good, let's get to work. If they want a war, let's show them what happens when you shake the human's cage." The Hephaestus turned, its scarred hull catching the light of the alien sun. It looked different now. Not just a mystery, not just a monster, but a shield. The Galactic Conical had been shaken, yes, but in its place something stronger had been forged, an alliance of steel and will standing ready against the dark. And in the silence of the void, the human warship waited.